Hello, I'm Professor Benavides, and I want to go ahead and give you a review of the first part of Chapter 4, Working with Lists. We're going to zero in on looping and indentation errors. So this is part 1. So we just finished Chapter 3. And in Chapter 3, we learned how to make a simple list. And you learn to work with the individual elements in the list. In this chapter, Chapter 4, Part 1, you'll learn how to loop through the entire list using just a few lines of code, regardless of how long the list is. So looping allows you to take the same action or a set of actions with every item in a list. As a result, you'll be able to work efficiently with lists of any length, including those with thousands or even millions of items. So let's talk about Python's for loop. You're looking at it right now on line 5. So the author of your book calls it a for loop. I like to call it a for in because as you can see, it's got this other keyword here. But it's referred to as simply a Python's for loop. If you want to call it that way, yes. Okay. So we use a for loop to print out, in this particular case, each name in a list of magicians. So we begin by defining the list, just as we did, and we learned how to do that in Chapter 3. Then we define the loop. And this line tells Python to pull a name from the list of magicians and associate it with the variable magician. Next, we tell Python to print the name that's just been assigned to magician. So Python then repeats these two lines once for every name in the list. It might help us to read this code as for every magician in the list of magicians, print the magician's name. So let's look at this code. As you can see on line 1, I've got a little comment. So on line 3 is where I define my list. So we say magicians get, and we've got 3 elements in this list: Alice, David, and Carolina. And it's string data type, right? So on line 5, we begin our for loop. So the keywords are for and in. Magician is the singular of magicians. So as you all remember from the last chapter, we always want to make our lists plural, so that when we use this temporary variable here, we will make it the singular version of the plural version of the list. So the syntax for this is you start off with the keyword for, you follow it with the temporary variable, the keyword in, then the name of your list, a colon, and the colon signifies that what follows is the body of the loop. In this case, we're saying print magician. I'm going to go ahead and run this. I think I have, but let me run it again. And as you can see, it prints Alice, David, and Carolina, all on separate lines, because when we use the print statement, it goes for each item in the list, it doesn't put in the square brackets. Okay, so this is our first example of using the Python for loop. So let's take a closer look at this. So looping is a really important concept in programming. Looping is important because it's one of the most common ways a computer automates repetitive tasks. So again, to reiterate, our list will be plural. The temporary variable will be the singular version of that plural list name. Okay, let's look at our next example. So in this example, we're going to see how we can do much more work. We can do more work within a for loop. Before, we just had one little print statement. So here we see 2 print statements, and we can have many. So in other words, we can have lots of things done inside this loop. So we can do as much work as we like with each value in the list. So you can write as many lines of code as you like in the for loop. Every indented line following the line for magician in magicians is considered inside the loop, and each indented line is executed once for each value in the list. Therefore, you do as much work as you like with each value in the list. Because we have indented both calls to print, each line will be executed once for every magician in the list. The new line, escape code, in the second print statement or call, inserts a blank line after each pass through the loop. This creates a set of messages that are neatly grouped for each person in the list. So let me go ahead and run this. So here you see it. So line 1, I go ahead and define my list. Line 3, I go ahead and have the first line of my for loop. For magician in magicians, colon. So what follows must be indented. So you press the tab key, right? So I'm going to have one line, one print statement, and then another print statement. So it's really important that we understand, you know, if you're coming from like Java, you remember we had to do curly brackets. We don't have curly brackets here. The curly brackets delineates a block of code. So what delineates the block of code here is the white space. The indentation on lines 4 and 5 makes sure that those two lines will be inside of the loop. And when you, by mistake, don't indent or indent, you can create all kinds of problems, okay? So blast from the past, we have this escape code here of the \n. That gives us this extra line. Let me go ahead and get rid of that so you can see what happens if we don't have it. So as you can see, every print statement does have a carriage return. That's why it says, Alice, that was a great trick. I can't wait to see your next trick, Alice, right? And then it says, David, that was a great trick. I can't wait to see your next trick, David. So we do get a carriage return line feed, but we only get one. If we needed to have a space in between these, that is when we go ahead and put the \n. Let me go ahead and run this again. And that gives us that line there. Of course, what I like to do a lot of times is I like to go ahead and just go ahead and put in an empty print statement. He doesn't do this, but it's pretty much the same thing. Let's see if it is. Yeah, it gives us the same thing on here. So that's pretty much your choice as to how you would like to go ahead and have that extra line or blank line in between the two lines that's being printed. Okay, our next little demo here. And this little demo here is a really good example of doing something after a for loop. And many times when we do a loop, we're manipulating some form of data in some way. And then when we get out of the loop, we many times want to have show some kind of summary information. So what happens here is we find that a lot of times, see how it's not indented on line 7? That's how it knows not to be, that it's not part of the loop. Sometimes people would either indent by mistake, or they will not indent when they're in the loop, when they should have indented. So indentation in the right place is really, really important. Let me go ahead and run this. And as you can see, it says, you know, Alice, that was a great trick. Everything is the same except that last line. If you don't put that last line in the right place, you can have something called logic error. So sometimes when you don't put things in the right place, you get syntax errors, or sometimes you get logic errors. But in this particular case, it's being done correctly. So any lines of code after the for loop that are not indented are executed once without repetition. In other words, it's just another line of code, right? Just another line of code. So that brings us to the topic of avoiding these indentation errors. So how does Python use indentation? So Python uses indentation to determine how a line or a group of lines is related to the rest of the program. In the previous examples, the lines that printed messages to individual magicians were part of the for loop because they were indented. Okay, so indentation, very important. It gives us a clear vision of the structure of your program. So what are some common indentation errors? I've been alluding to them. It's indenting when you're not supposed to indent, right? And not indenting when you were supposed to indent, right? These are the common indentation errors. So for example, some people sometimes indent lines of code that don't need to be indented, or forget to indent lines that need to be indented. Okay, so if you forget to indent, what are you gonna get? You're gonna get something called an indentation error. Let me go ahead and try that. Let's say that if I forget to indent here. I did that. So I'm gonna go ahead and run this. And it says here, my exception error is called indentation error. Expected an indented block. So if you'll indent it and then run it again, you'll notice I still have a problem here. And that's because I copied and pasted this from the web. And if you space rather than indent, it doesn't come across right. So I'm going to go ahead and do a Control A so that you can see what I'm talking about here. This is not in the book. It's just one of those little debugging things that happens inside of Sublime. Control A, and can you see how those dots, that's pressing the space bar. So what we want to do is have a tab all the time. So I don't know, I think this happens just when you copy and paste things. Okay, so now it's working just fine. Why? Because see how I've got some dots there, but that's a blank line. It's not affecting anything. It wasn't having a problem before, but apparently it did this time. You just press the escape key or click away to get rid of that. But I showed you how it won't do that again now. So if I come over here, I press the backspace, see how it went all the way to the beginning, rather than going a tab space at a time. So let me run this again. So yes, I got my indentation error. And then I'm going to go ahead and press tab and then run again, and everything is fine. Okay, so hopefully you got that, especially if you're copying and pasting, from the internet. So that's an example of forgetting to indent. Why did it give us that error? Is because when you put this colon in here, it's expecting you to indent, I believe it does that automatically for you, but let me go ahead and see. If I go right after the colon here and I press enter, no, wouldn't it be cool if it just went ahead and just put you right there? I guess I'm too used to other, maybe it does that in another editor that I have somewhere. Control Z. So indenting unnecessarily can sometimes get you in problems, as well. Let's go ahead and take a look at this next example. I could have just indented that. Is that, see this line right here? In fact, I'll just do it on this one. If I indent it, what happened here? Control Z. If I press tab key, it's going to get confused. Okay. So if I do a Control B on here, look what happens. It says, Alice, that was a great trick. I can't wait to see your next trick. And then it says, thank you, everyone. I have a blank line because of this escape code here. And then it says, thank you, everyone. And then it goes to David. So it's all messed up, right? It's all messed up because it thinks that this is part of the loop. So here I indented when I was not supposed to indent from a logic point of view. So in other words, sometimes you're going to get syntax errors, like with that indentation error that I showed you. Sometimes the code is going to run, but it's not going to the output is not going to be what you expect. Okay, so here I'm expecting to have a thank you at the very end only once. not repeated for 3 times for each magician, right? So you're either going to have a syntax error or a logic error if you don't indent properly. Remember that you've got to include the colon. If you don't include the colon, you're going to get an error message there, a syntax error. Let me go ahead and delete that to show you and run it. And here's just a syntax error. Notice how it does point. So hopefully the light will turn on and you'll say, oh, I forgot the colon. And you'll put that in there and run it again. And there we go. So that's a syntax error for not putting in the colon. So that brings us to our first try it. Let's go ahead and look at the exercise 4.1. It's pizzas. So it says, think of at least 3 kinds of your favorite pizza. Like mine is like anchovy. You like anybody like anchovies? I love anchovies. I don't know why. And I like pesto. What else is? I do like that margarita one, the one that has hardly anything. My wife doesn't like it's got like hardly anything on it. I think it's great. But anyway, let's take a quick look at this pizza application here. And we're going to go ahead and use a loop here to traverse the list. We're going to print a blank line, and then we're going to go ahead and print a sentence about each kind of pizza. And then we're going to have a summary statement at the end that's not going to be part of the loop. Okay, so let me go ahead and show that to you right here. There it is. Let me go ahead and run it real fast. So here it is. On line 1, I go ahead and define my list: pepperoni, Hawaiian, veggie. Then I go ahead and print the names. 1 per line: pepperoni, Hawaiian, and veggie. Then I print a blank line, and it seems like there's too many lines printed here. I don't know why that's being done. I would have just done 1 print statement, you know. So I'm not really sure. I think it looks a little awkward there, but let's go on, go with the show. Then we'll print a sentence about each pizza. So we'll say 4 pizza in favorite pizzas. So notice here we have plural for the list, favorite pizzas. So what is the singular of this? Pizza. Very, very, very important. Don't be using X, Y, and Z, you know, or anything like that. So here we say I love pizza. Remember, pizza is the temporary variable. And every time we loop through this, it'll go through each item in the list. And then finally, on line 13, I have a summary statement. I really love pizza. Later on, we'll learn that once we get out of a loop, typically we'll have some kind of summary information. I mean, you could be using a loop for many reasons. I mean, you could use a loop to sum things, count things, and then once you're out of the loop, whatever variable you've been using as an accumulator, then you can show the summary statistics once you have exited the loop. So that's what the author is trying to bring home here with the importance of knowing when to indent and when not to indent. Then we go to the next exercise, is 4.2, animals. And you know, if you go and look at the author's website, he doesn't provide a solution for this one, but guess what? It's exactly the same as this one. Maybe he does that on purpose, because basically all I did was say, yeah, here we go, true confessions. I just copied this pizza thing into the other one, and then just, you know, because he says, think of at least 3 different animals that have common characteristics. Store the names of these animals in a list, and then use a for loop to print out the names of each animal. I think we just did something like that with pizzas, right? And then it says, modify your program to print a statement about each animal, such as a dog would make a great pet. Well, okay, fine. You know, that sounds like, you know, I really love pepperoni pizza. And then it says add an extra line, and then add a summary statement saying any of these animals would make a great pet. That's the same as I really love pizza. So I copied the structure over here, and I just, instead of favorite pizza, I called it just, probably could have called it favorite animals, or, you know. And so it's for animal in animals. Print animal. Then I have I print my blank line, and then I make a sentence about each animal. A cat would be a great pet, right? Any of these animals would be a great pet. So piece of cake, really nice that that this worked out, so easy. So that is the introduction to the first. That's the first. This is the first part of chapter 4, looping and indentation. I want to go ahead and close this by talking about the fact that your author does have some cheat sheets, and we'll go ahead and bring that in. And on these cheat sheets, this particular one is on list. So it's a summary of chapter 3 and 4. So you can see, where are we here? This is where chapter 4 starts. I wish you would have just had a cheat sheet for like per chapter rather than by topic. But the cheat sheet, as you can see, is a great way of summarizing what you've learned. Here you see your for loop, and you can see an example of how you can print a message for each item. Okay. And that's pretty much all we've covered so far. In the next section, part 2, we'll talk about numeric lists. And then after that, we'll talk about some special topics and styling and things of that nature, which are pretty important. We'll talk about tuples and list comprehensions. Now that's kind of like an advanced topic, but that'll be in part 3 of my video. So that's it for the first part of chapter 1, looping and indentation errors. Hopefully you've got this indentation thing down, because if not, you're going to get a lot of syntax errors, guys, or logic errors.